To close the festival, it is a pleasure to introduce my friend and frequent collaborator, Giacomo Calabria. Giacomo is an award-winning scholar with Humanities New York and the author of 2 books, a play, and more than 200 articles under the pen name Jacopo della Quercia. His work has been featured in Folger Magazine, Politico Magazine, Reader's Digest, Slate, and academic offerings from Princeton University and Louisiana State University Press. He recently edited 3 books on thought leadership for Gibbs Smith Education and co-authored an essay with UAlbany graduate Christopher Newman, who I think might be here. Was he able to make it? Okay. Well, we say hi to him anyway. They co-authored a piece for Weird Tales, 100 Years of Weird. He's currently teaching a class on ancient philosophy at Guilderland Public Library, which is open to the public and meeting virtually these next 3 Tuesdays from 6:30 to 8. In 2018, I had the pleasure of co-running a Humanities New York screening and discussion series with Giacomo, so I can confidently state that the introduction to Ridley Scott's iconic Blade Runner and his contributions to the post-screening discussion will change the way you understand this film. So please help in welcoming our final speaker for the 2023 festival, Giacomo Calabria.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Just mentioning for the sake of my co-author, who couldn't be here, he literally fell through a ceiling.
Oh.
But he's perfectly fine.
Wow, he doesn't half-ass anything, does he?
No, I think he's part replicant, actually, because he was able to not get injured. Just wanted to mention that the book that the 2 of us worked on together is Weird Tales, 100 Years of Weird, edited by New York Times bestselling author and 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner Jonathan Mayberry. We will have copies of the book available for sale in case anybody wants it. And as mentioned, our contribution was examining the surprisingly understudied aspect of the poet Dante and the illustrator Gustave Doré's influence on H.P. Lovecraft and the creation of Cthulhu. So with regards to Blade Runner, and specifically what we're going to be seeing is hopefully the final version of Blade Runner that is ever released. Blade Runner, to begin with, was based on the story Do Androids Dream About Electric Sheep by science fiction author Philip K. Dick. It's a very different story from the film we're going to be seeing, primarily because the word Blade Runner isn't even mentioned in it. Our main character is described as simply being a bounty hunter. He's also someone who, without spoiling anything, and without probably too much of a surprise, is made very clear in the story to be a married man. Emphasis on the word man, by which I mean he's a Homo sapien. This is going to be one element that we see throughout the entire film, in the sense that we're going to be seeing discussions about what exactly does it mean to be human. Is it possible for an android to be more human than human? Is it possible for Homo sapien to actually shed their humanity and in essence either become a new type of animal or some sort of subhuman, in which case is it possible that artificial intelligence and artificially intelligent humanoids might actually be the rightful heirs to the definition of not only what it is to be human or what it is to have humanity. This makes it a subject which we at Humanities New York are happy to discuss and very interested in hearing your discussions on, especially since artificial intelligence and the ethics of it and even the philosophies involving in it is something that is of wide discussion not only today, but also with regard to the philosophy department at UAlbany in particular. So, with all this said, I do want to say when it comes to my own introduction to Blade Runner, I first saw this film when I was 18 years old and I fell asleep. I saw it a second time afterwards and I fell asleep. The third time I saw it, I kid you not, I was actually irritated because one, I was the only one of my friends who was watching it who was still awake. And I was angry that this is the film that I stayed up to see. Now, so I eventually went to actually where I was just yesterday. I was in Brooklyn in Prospect Park area for a baby shower. And I was visiting the home of my uncle, who's a professor at the Gallatin School at New York University, Antonio Rotigliano. And I told him that I had just seen Blade Runner, and he actually does talk like an Italian version of Dracula. This is his voice. He's like, oh, Blade Runner, it's a magnificent picture. I want to say this microphone actually helps add to the illusion of his voice. He literally sounds like this. And so I shared some of my disappointment with the film. I said there's certain elements of it I appreciated. The special effects are still remarkable. According to Red Letter Media, internet armchair critics, they recently described Blade Runner as boasting probably the greatest special effects in cinema history before CGI. And in that sense, the miniatures are remarkable in this film. The trickery is fantastic, and Ridley Scott is really demonstrating. Again, this is only the third film he ever made. His first film, The Duelist, was shot with just a little bit over $100,000 budget. And his second film, Alien, is widely regarded one of, if not the greatest monster movies ever made, and itself is just, it's a museum of so many different artistic talent and symbolism, creativity, every element of the arts, from the score to the costuming to the camera work, the acting, fantastic acting from the men and women in that picture. But he's going back to my uncle, though. He said something that completely changed my impression of Blade Runner, and it's something which I very hope to illustrate for your imagination before we see this film, because this, in my opinion, is the best way to see this film. Ridley Scott, in his Blu-ray, simply introduced this film as saying, in his opinion, this is his favorite version of the film. This being produced, I believe it was released in 2007 in sort of the mid stages of Blu-ray, and close to, I believe it was the 25th-ish anniversary of Blade Runner. So what my uncle said is, you have to view it like it's a Renaissance painting. Now this changes things. You can look at a Renaissance painting from many different ways. I do have a Renaissance painting prepared, but we'll have to be saving it for after the presentation because I don't want to spoil anything for you. How many of you have never seen Blade Runner? Raise your hand. Excellent. Almost the majority. So when you're just picturing in your mind all of you a Renaissance painting, it can be The Birth of Venus, for example. Some of you may be familiar with the Sandro Botticelli painting. So when you're picturing a Renaissance painting, there's many different things you could look at when it comes to it. You might recognize that many of the people are nude, for example. Well, if you're looking at a Renaissance painting, but you're studying it specifically as a Renaissance painting, there's telltales that you look for, such as, why are the figures nude? What are some of the elements about the human body that are anatomically correct? What certain elements are incorrect? Where are some elements where they're drawing emphasis to the body or the positioning of the body? Why does Venus have, say, a lot of weight on one of her legs but not the other legs? Why are her hips positioned in a way that's somewhat perpendicular to where her shoulder is? Furthermore, why is there such emphasis on the figures in the foreground, but especially when compared to other works of art such as Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, why is there so much less emphasis when it comes to, say, the rippling of the water or the landscape in the background? I mean, just imagine if Leonardo, or even Hieronymus Bosch, who himself was a landscape artist, imagine if they had designed the background to The Birth of Venus. What a different painting it would be. Or even imagine if, say, Peter Bruegel the Elder was the one who painted it. Would he do something similar to The Fall of Icarus, where Icarus is barely even visible? Like, Icarus is a Where's Waldo in that painting, if you've ever seen it. It's actually like an anti-portrait, an anti-Renaissance painting. And I'm actually mentioning that for a reason because Peter Bruegel the Elder is actually going to be one of several artists that influence some of the images that you'll be seeing over here and some of the antecedent images in the films, one film in particular that I'm not going to mention yet, that heavily influenced the visual look of this film. So you're not only going to be seeing one Renaissance painting in this film, you're going to be seeing several. We are going to be going through something that is less like a Renaissance painting and even less like a museum. He does give it good advice, my uncle. He says you should view the film like it is a Renaissance painting. However, you are going to be experiencing a work of art that more closely resembles a cathedral. It is something that has an incredibly deep substructure to it that is almost a century in the making and the product of genius architects, of art, of scenery, of special effects that themselves are some of the greatest originators of the entire craft of narrative fiction and also science fiction. And in the century that had passed, we're going to be seeing the new technology when it's going to be used. Sometimes it's going to be enhancing the final product that Ridley Scott did. Other times it's going to be used minimally. Other times it will be changing the entire message and messages of the film. What we're going to be seeing tonight is a film about apartheid. We're also going to be seeing a film that is about, essentially, Paradise Lost, one of the most influential works of creative fiction, specifically fantasy, in the English language that became one of the biggest influences in perhaps the great work of modern science fiction, The New Prometheus, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. We're going to be seeing a political satire. We're going to be seeing an economic criticism. We're going to be seeing a Cold War film. We're going to be seeing a post-apocalyptic film. We're going to be seeing a criticism of nuclear war. We are going to be seeing a science fiction Bible of theological commentary, all of this in one, which makes Blade Runner and many of the works by Ridley Scott essentially an encyclopedia of opportunities for criticism, because even if some of the points that we can actually illustrate using Blade Runner may not have been the director's intention, Blade Runner is an incredibly useful film to use as a starting point for understanding many elements of theology, of philosophy, of the art of filmmaking, and other elements that might forever be lost to audiences unless Ridley Scott gives another tell-all. One of the great things about him is he has no problem spilling tea or changing what his intentions were. But as I said, I thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce this film, and let's take a walk through this cathedral. Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, 1981, The Final Cut. Thank you.